guys. All right. Let's get started. So today, this is our last week. All right. And in this last week, we've got two lectures. Both of those lectures, as I talked about before, we're going to focus on some applied skills that you can carry from this class into the rest of your life. I added this lecture after looking at the graduation, the 5-year graduation stats for people who enter this university. If you guys haven't looked at these, don't let them influence you. But what it is that there's a number of you, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of you, are not going to actually graduate with a degree from this university. And that's fine. But I want to make sure that you guys have something, those 3 of you, have something coming out of here that will be valuable. Maybe even more valuable than the U of Oregon degree going forward for the rest of your life. So we're going to be talking about, in this class, judgment and decision making, looking specifically at cognitive errors, how to use psychology and rational thinking to prevent yourself from making these errors. And then next class, we're going to be talking about the emotional side of that, which is what psychological tricks you can use to actually be a happier person, to live a life full of more well-being. Before we launch into this, I wanted to go over a few of the questions that came from last class. So one of those questions was about the psychological disorders we went through. I mentioned that some have a more genetic component to them, and other ones are more environmental. It seems like all of them are both, but the degree to which they're both varies depending on the psychological disorder. So somebody asked, I think it was about bipolar, what your odds of getting it are if you have a sibling who has it. I looked this stuff up. How likely is one to develop blank if one sibling has it? Okay, let's start with schizophrenia. So as we talked about, schizophrenia is actually much more common than we would think it is, considering the seriousness of the disease. 1% of the population is not nothing. So imagine that Ashley has schizophrenia. Okay, so your Ashley has schizophrenia, and you have your sister, Elizabeth. Now, your sister, most of your sisters, will share 50% of your genes, right? They have half your genes. So if somebody is one of these direct relatives, a sister, a brother, a parent, or a child, the odds of getting schizophrenia, if you have one of those first-order relatives who has it, it increases to 10%. So you have a 10 times more likely chance of getting schizophrenia than you would if you had no relatives who had schizophrenia. Now, if you are an identical twin, so if you are identical to the person who has schizophrenia, your odds go up even more. They go up to 35 to 50%. Now, the thing about identical twins, not fraternal twins. Fraternal twins are not actually sharing 100% of your genes, but an identical twin is basically a clone person. Does anybody here have an identical twin? Okay, yeah, they're pretty weird. Yeah. So, was there someone? No? Doesn't matter. Ashley and Mary Kate have identical twins, each other. And Mary Kate, in this case, would be highly likely to get schizophrenia if her twin sister had it. But you can see that it's not anywhere near 100%. So, like we talked about various things in this class, nothing is written. There is a very large environmental component and a chance component, which is going to determine whether or not Mary Kate actually develops schizophrenia, even if her twin has it, even if a genetic clone of her has schizophrenia. What about major depression? So we talked about the 2 different types of depression. This is one of the more serious ones. It's a recurrent episodic form of major depression. In the general populace, that's about 5%. Depression in general, we see at around 15 to 20%, depending if you're male or female. So if Ashley has if Ashley is depressed, if she falls into that 5%, we suffers from major recurrent depression, their sister has a 3 times higher level of chance than in the normal population. So as you can see, it's not as big of a jump as it would be for schizophrenia. That's because schizophrenia has a much larger genetic component than does major depression. And if you're an identical twin, it actually goes up quite a bit to 59%. But remember, we're starting with the general population of 5%. So even if you have a identical twin with depression, still about 50-50 odds of developing it yourself. And then the other one we talked about was bipolar. Odds of getting it are between 1 and 2%. For the general population, if you have a sibling who has it, it goes up to 12%, so it goes up to 10 times more likely. And then if you have an identical twin, it's actually quite a big jump. So as we talked about, bipolar has a much larger genetic component, much more invariant to the environmental causes than would major depression be. Questions on that? All right. So then the other question that came up when we were talking about schizophrenia is, can it be caused by drug use? There are rumors floating around, and those happen to be just rumors. As far as we know now, there's no scientific evidence that there is a causal connection between these. It might be, as Stephanie suggested, that some people have schizophrenia, some people feel the symptoms coming on, they'll self-medicate with drugs, and so you'll see a correlation, but there is no causation. And then, somebody asked me before, at the beginning of class, what does Freud think about homosexuality? So this is some of the stuff that we talked about across the class. We talked about how Freud has all these defense mechanisms. We used the example of what you would do if you were trying to repress homosexual sexual urges. And the question is, well, this is likely a problem that Freud addressed. What did he actually think about it? And it turns out that he actually has a letter, a famous letter from 1935, where he made his position actually very explicitly stated. There's the letter. I remember we had somebody in here who could translate from German. You want to try? Okay. You don't have to translate. Here's what I can read the whole thing, because it's actually really interesting. I gather from your letter that your son is a homosexual. I'm most impressed by the fact that you do not mention this term yourself in the information about it. May I question why you avoid it? Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of the sexual function produced by a certain arrest of sexual development. Many highly respectable individuals in ancient modern times have been homosexuals, several of the greatest among them, Plato, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. It is a great injustice to persecute homosexuality as a crime, and cruelty too. If you do not believe me, read the books of Havelock Ellis. By asking you if I can help, you mean, I suppose, if I could abolish homosexuality and make normal heterosexuality take its place. The answer is, in a general way, we cannot promise to achieve it. In a certain number of cases, we succeed in developing the blighted germs of heterosexual tendencies, which are present in every homosexual in the majority of cases. In the majority of cases, it is no more possible. It is a question of the quality and the age of the individual. The results of treatment cannot be predicted. By quality, he doesn't mean the veil, like how good of a person he is. It means various qualities of the person. What analysis can do for your son runs on a different line. If he is unhappy, neurotic, torn by conflicts, inhibited in his social life, analysis may bring him harmony, peace, and full efficiency, whether he remains a homosexual or gets changed. Sincerely yours, with best wishes, Freud. So Freud, you remember, was big on sex. He thought that most, if not all, of our psychological challenges were driven by these sexual urges. He saw human beings as rooted in his natural impulse and then confined by society, which took form in the superego. And it was the conflict between society's expectations and these natural libidinal energies, these sexual urges, that created a lot of psychological conflict. What Freud saw, and he did treat, or try to treat, or have various homosexual patients, is that it wasn't something that could be easily changed. He felt that it had to be a natural thing. He felt that everybody was actually bisexual in nature, and that there were some natural things that shifted some people one way or the other. And And so he felt that homosexuality was a largely immutable, unchangeable, natural thing. And the conflicts, the psychological conflicts, were not the homosexuality itself, but the conflicts that derive from societal expectations about a heterosexual norm and the fact that they had these homosexual urges. Now that was, at his time, quite an enlightened view. Psychology actually moved backwards after that. They did classify homosexuality as a psychological disorder in the DSM until the 70s. I think 1977 is when they listed it. So they did see it as a mental illness, but Freud did not. And he was ahead of his time for that, and this is a very interesting letter as a result. Questions on this, or any of the stuff that we covered here, or any other questions from our psychological disorders class? All right. Is that a question? No, that's it. Okay. All right. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about various cognitive errors, things in which we lose, our rational mind is led astray by various tricks that our brains play on us. Now, the main thing to know about why we suffer from these cognitive errors is that our brains are not built for truth. I mentioned that there were a few things that I want you to take home. If you forget everything, remember, 5 things from this class. This is one of them. Our brains are not built for truth. What you intuitively see is not necessarily what's there. It's not necessarily the most accurate way of seeing things. And I can demonstrate this very easily. You guys have all seen visual illusions. Those of you taking 2 and 1 probably studied them a little more extensively. How many of you guys have seen this? Oh, not many. Okay. Those 2 tabletops are the same shape. They certainly don't look like it, right? You think that one's kind of fatter, that one's kind of taller, but really, it's an illusion that your mind is playing on you because it's using shortcuts based on various things about the picture. And I can prove it to you. So if you take the diagonals and you move it completely like that, you see that was totally unmanipulated on my part. That is actually genuinely a demonstration that these are the same shape. So what's happening there is our brain is interpreting things differently than they actually are in the world. We're making an error in our visual perception. Let me show you another one. So that circle and that circle are the same size. All right, you don't believe me? All right. Right? So they're the same size. Again, it's something where because of what we saw before, because it was organized in a certain way that is designed to trick our system, we see them as different sizes, not actually the same. Those are 2 examples of very, very low-level visual system where we see things differently. Those kind of errors are made not only for visual things like this, but when we're trying to think through rational decisions. Now, the reason for that is that our brain is constantly trying to use cognitive shortcuts to efficiently process information. If you think about all the information, all the decisions we have to make, your brain is trying to do that in an efficient process. And it's using various shortcuts that work most of the time, or have worked most of the time, which is why our brain uses them. They're functional, but they're not always accurate. And in certain situations, like the visual illusions that we saw, and like some of the cognitive errors that we're going to talk about today, they go completely haywire. Now, these shortcuts, or heuristics, or whatever you want to call them, they produce systematic and predictable errors. We're going to go over 7 of them. There are a few that we've talked about already which we classify as this. So the halo effect is one thing we talked about. Confirmation bias is another big one. Those are biases that affect how we think. These are 7 more. I'm only going to talk about 7. There's a lot we could talk about. There's some that I might actually talk a little bit about next class. But I want to focus on 7 right now because that's a number that people can remember. I want you guys to really learn each of these, remember them, and look out for them when you're making decisions out in the rest of your lives. Now the very first one, by the way, some of these are mentioned in your textbook. So the availability heuristic, representative heuristic, loss aversion, those are covered in your textbook. I want to cover them again here so that they really get hammered into you, because these are really things that you want to watch out for. Okay. In Eugene, there are more dogs on leashes or ducks on leashes. Who says ducks? Who says dogs? Okay, yeah. Well, you're right. In this case, you're right. And how do you determine that? Well, you think of all the times in Eugene that you've seen dogs on leashes, and you're like, okay, well, I can actually think of 100 examples. And I think of the few times that you've seen ducks on leashes, I've never actually seen a duck. Doesn't come to mind very easily. And as a result, the answer which comes more easily to mind is the dogs on leashes. The thing which is more available to mind is dogs on leashes. So you're using the cognitive availability of the idea as a shortcut, as a heuristic to say which one is more likely. And in this case, it's a very good strategy. All right. In English, the language, there are more four-letter words that start with R, or, okay, well, there's something else supposed to appear here. There you go. All right. Four-letter words that have R as the third letter. Most people in this case, in fact, almost all people in this case would say, well, there's more of these, and the reason why is because you can easily rattle off a bunch of words which start with R, that are four letters. Ring, rang, run, rang, ride, raft, road, road, road. You can do this very easily. They come to mind very, very easily. Whereas on the other hand, if you try to think of these, there are a lot, but they don't come to mind as easily. Think bird, or bark, or fortune. Much slower to come to mind. And as a result, people say this, but in this case, there's actually many, many more, multiples of one, of words that have R as the third letter than there are letters that have R as the first letter. The reason why these ones are come to mind available, are more available to mind, is because that's how we remember words. We remember words by what they start with. When you look up words in the dictionary, they're not organized by the third letter, they're organized by the first letter. You have a whole bunch of R's that are all clumped together, easy to remember words by their first letter, hard to come up with this word. So in that case, the words that came more easily to mind are actually the less frequent ones. So though it was more available to mind, the idea that it is more frequent actually fails here, right? So there your heuristic fails. All right, let's try another one. So this is people's estimates, Americans' estimates. This was done a little while ago, so their estimates out of 200 million people. How many people each year, of those 200 people, die of these various things? So we've got tornadoes, fireworks, drowning, and asthma. Okay, so the estimates are this. Tornadoes kill 564, fireworks 160, drowning 506, and asthma nearly 1,700. People are not dumb. They don't think that there's more people dying from fireworks than asthma. These are the numbers that they estimate. But if you look at what the actual numbers are, 96, nearly 2,000, and then over 7,000, right? So it is the case that these are more. So they're right that there are more of these than there are these, but the magnitude of difference is just way off here. And if you look at the ones that they're underestimating versus the ones that they're overestimating, you see a pattern emerge. So these ones, they're overestimating. And these ones, they're underestimating. And the reason for that is because one of them, or two of them actually, are more available to mind than the other ones. If you think about tornadoes, you think about all this destruction. Every time there's a massive tornado, you see pictures of flattened houses and torn up fields, and you think, well, that comes to mind, that must kill a lot of people. Fireworks, very easy to think of. Somebody dying in a horrible firework accident on July 4th. When that does happen, the 6 times that it happens, we hear about it, what a tragedy. This is where fireworks culture is bringing. We hear about it a lot, so they're very available to mind. But you don't hear. It doesn't get covered in the news when somebody has an asthma attack and dies. It doesn't get covered in the news when somebody drowns and dies. Those are things which are not available to mind, but are actually happening more often. So the availability to our mind is what's skewing our perception of how frequent these things are. And in this case, the heuristic, again, fails. Questions on this? All right. So that leads us to look at these 4 things. Now, one of them is not like the others here. And that one is a swimming pool. Because a swimming pool is something which is liable to actually kill you. The other things are not actually that dangerous to you at all, right? So that was a big deal, killed 3,000 people. Since then, Muslim terrorists have killed 13 people in the United States in the last 13 years. Not very many. Earthquakes don't actually kill very many people. Plane crashes don't actually kill very many people. But that's swimming pool. That is a death trap. And you remember that it's people your age with your crazy lack of impulse control that are the ones who drown the most. So you should really be afraid of that swimming pool. Don't worry about that. Okay, so let's talk about this plane crash thing. The plane crashes. I've flown on planes quite a few times in my life, and I can remember maybe 3 when I didn't actually think at some point on that plane ride, what if this thing crashes? You know, you go to Philly, you're on there for like 4 hours, right? So you have a lot of opportunity every time there's a bump. Maybe this is the time it's going to crash. I have to keep reminding myself that plane crashes happen so infrequently, especially compared to car crashes. So your lifetime odds of dying on a plane crash are 1 in about 1.5 million. So take 1.5 million people, one of those is likely to die in a plane crash. On the other hand, if you take 7,000 people, one is likely to die in a car crash. Car crashes happen much more frequent, and you can say, well, plane crashes go a lot further. But if you look at deaths per mile, you see the differences there. So for every 11 miles that people drive, 11 million miles, sorry, that people drive, there is 1 death in car crashes. You need to travel 500 million miles to die in a plane crash. I mean, on average, right? And yet, we never see, unless there's like an 11-car pileup, we never see big news when there's a car crash. But remember what happened last month, or was it 2 months ago, when basically for an entire month, all we heard on CNN was about this potential plane crash. Those are the things which are hammering into your mind, making it so available that you think of plane crashes. And as a result, now everybody's scared of planes, even though they're much safer than cars. So there again, availability heuristic. The availability to mind affects your judgments of frequency. Now we put these 2 things together, and then you learn that since 9/11, many more people, and they run these analyses, they looked at how many people stopped taking planes and started driving, and they calculated how much more car accidents happened in those years because people stopped flying, and you find that we have way past the point where more people died from the fear of flying derived from 9/11 than people died in those attacks. They chose to take cars instead of planes, and they died doing so. The consequence of our fear of 9/11 has been much larger than the actual 9/11 attacks. And so that's actually how terrorism works. It's called terrorism for a reason. It's about terror. It's about using these cognitive biases to its advantage. It preys on those cognitive biases. If bin Laden actually wanted to kill a lot of Americans, he would have gotten lobby groups to ease gun laws and make us not wear seatbelts, right? If he really wanted to kill people, that's the route he would want to take. But he wanted to frighten us. He wanted to terrify us. He wanted to make the fear of what terrorists could do extremely available to mind, so we would react in those ways. And we did react in those ways, not just car crashes, but also a couple of wars and a lot of money, security at the airport. Terrorism, it worked. And it worked because of our psychological biases. Questions about that? Okay. Lotteries. This is kind of looking at the same thing, but in less grade, less diameter. So economists call lotteries the stupid tax. And I'm sure none of you guys play the lottery because you are much more intelligent than my last class of Psych 202 students who play the lottery a lot. So why is the lottery a stupid tax? Why do people play the lottery? People play the lottery. They spend more money on the lottery than any other form of entertainment combined, right? So you take all the movies and the video games and the pornography and you put it all together, and people spend more money and lose that money on lottery tickets. Now, when somebody wins a lottery ticket, when somebody wins like $40 million in some big lottery, they don't just get a little check in the mail, right? So they don't get an envelope and you get, okay, $40 million and you go cash it in the bank. They make an enormous deal about it. They put it on TV and they put it in the newspapers. Here's the, Bend, Oregon man who won $40 million. They give you these massive checks. They have balloons falling all over the place so that it hammers into your head the idea that, well, people win lottery tickets. Same with slot machines, right? So if any of you guys have been to a casino, I believe you're probably around your age, but you've seen them on TV, right? When somebody wins in a slot machine, all hell breaks loose, right? So these lights start, these sirens go off, and lights and coins start falling on the ground, and everybody turns around to see what's going on and realize, wow, people actually win in slot machines. And so what all those things are doing are they're making winning extremely available to money. When you think about lottery, the consequences of lottery tickets, you can very easily think about the massive checks and all the times people have won these things. What you don't think about is the many, many more times when people lost at the lottery tickets. You don't think about all the times people lost at the lottery tickets. It's actually equivalent. Buying a lottery ticket, you're more likely to die from various causes going to the store to buy a lottery ticket than actually winning the lottery ticket. It's actually a negative impact on your life. If they showed on TV, the news was required to cover the people who lost lottery tickets as much as they cover the people who won lottery tickets. If you just had every person who lost the lottery ticket say, I lost, the next person says, I lost, the next person says, I lost. You would have to watch for 9 years without taking sleep breaks to see all those people, and then at the end you have 30 seconds of people saying, I won, I won, I won. If you saw that, if all those losers became so available to money, you would not play lottery tickets. You would realize how astronomically unlikely it is that you're going to actually win these lottery tickets. Questions? So the rejoinder to this is that, okay, well, people derive a lot of pleasure. People derive utility, enjoyment from the lottery tickets, the act of the anticipation of the lottery tickets, rather than getting the money. So it's like they buy for the enjoyment, knowing that they're not actually going to win, but they sort of think that there might be a chance that they're going to win. And there is just extremely, extremely less likely than there. All right. You remember these guys, right? I have proved to you how this idea of the availability heuristic affects your lottery ticket decisions. And hopefully this is actually going to make you think twice about buying a lottery ticket. Okay, so imagine there's a lottery. There are 10 tickets in this lottery. And it costs $1 to buy each ticket, and you can win $20. One person will win $20. One of those tickets would be a $20 prize. And so, say, all of these guys get a ticket. They say that's a good deal, you can win $20. So everybody's got a ticket, there's 9 of them, there's one ticket left over. Do you want to buy it? In this case, if you calculate the odds, you see that, well, it's a good deal, right? You're going to spend $1, you have a 1 in 10 chance of winning, you can win $20. That's actually an expected valuation return of like $2, right? So you probably would buy it. Now, what if I do this? What if Song buys every single ticket? So, except for that one, right? So now he's got 9 of the 10 tickets, and the question is, do you want to buy this 10th ticket? Now, people hesitate more, because it's extremely easy to imagine Song winning the lottery ticket because he's bought so many and being all smug about it. And it makes it much less likely that you think you'll buy it, and so you don't want to buy it. But it's actually the same odds. You have exactly the same odds as if those tickets were spread out on windows. So it's because of that availability of losing, the availability to find somebody else winning, that dissuades you from buying a lottery ticket in that case. And it affects your judgments. Questions? Okay. Next one. Representativeness heuristic. This is also in your textbook. Now, this is Jeff. He has an IQ of 150, which is, as you guys know, over 3 standard deviations above the norm. So he's like Kobe Bryant smart. He wears glasses, and he loves working on math problems. All right. So is Jeff more likely to be an Ivy League physics professor or a postdoc? Who says postdoc? Who says Ivy League professor? Okay. Okay. It's interesting because you guys know that I'm trying to fool you with these questions, and you still want the Ivy League professor. So why is it more likely to be a postdoc? Okay, the reason is because the number of Ivy League physics professors in America, very, very, very small. Very small. The number of postal workers is much larger. So in making the decision about whether this guy is likely to be an Ivy League physics professor or a postal worker, you're ignoring the base rates. This is also called base rate fallacy. You're ignoring the base rates of how many people there actually are in those two groups. And the reason you're picking this minuscule group is because he is such a good representative of what you think about when you think about an Ivy League physics professor. You think it's somebody smart, wears glasses, loves working on math problems. But there are going to be more postal workers who fit that category than there are Ivy League professors, simply because there are so many postal workers. Even though that's not what you think about when you think about a postal worker, because there's so many, there's bound to be several who fall into that category, and there are going to be more of those than there are going to be Ivy League physics professors who fall into that category. So this is an example of the representativeness heuristic, which is relying on how well an example fits your schema of that group, and over-relying on that to the ignoring of other information like the base rates. I'm going to give you guys another example. This is a really famous example done by kind of the two fathers of judgment and decision-making, Tversky and Kahneman. And this is an example of what's called the construction fallacy. Some of you guys may have heard of this. Okay, so here's Linda. Linda is 31 years old. She's single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So now the question is this: is Linda more likely to be a bank teller, or more likely to be a bank teller and feminist? Who's the bank teller? Who's the bank teller and feminist? And you guys know I'm trying to trick you. So, statistically, it has to be more likely that she's a bank teller than a subcategory of bank tellers who happen to be feminists. It's statistically impossible that she's more likely to be a bank teller than a feminist. If every single bank teller was a feminist, then these things would be equal. But there can never be more feminist bank tellers than there are bank tellers in total. 86% of people say a bank teller and a feminist. Why? Because this description is so representative of what people think about when they think about a feminist. This is what a feminist looks like. Let me demonstrate this idea of the overlap. Okay, so if all these people are feminists, and even if most bank tellers are actually feminists, maybe even the vast majority, there's no way that this can be more than that. So you're ignoring the base rates. You're ignoring the statistical possibility that this is a subset of that because you're relying so much on the representativeness heuristic. You're thinking about somebody who fits that idea so well, and as a result, you make a cognitive error. Questions about that? Okay. Anger. All right, I want everybody who's on this side of the projector, I want you guys to close your eyes. All right, now all the people on this side, I'm going to put up a math equation. And I want you guys in 5 seconds to guess what you think the math equation is out. Or what you think the solution to the math equation is. Don't play a bunch of numbers. All right, so you only get 5 seconds to do this. Try to come to the answer quickly. And you guys keep your eyes closed. Just guess. All right? You guys got to stop thinking about it. Settle on the number you have. All right, and I want you guys to close your eyes. Everybody who's on this side, close your eyes. All right, you guys on this side can open your eyes. All right, do the math equation. Very fast, yes. Well, 2 seconds left. Got it? Okay. Now everybody open your eyes. What did you come up with? No, what did you come up with?
42.
Oh. Alright. Who on this side came up with more than 400? Hands up. More than 1,000. More than 2,000. Okay, who over here came up with more than 400? More than 1,000. More than 2,000. Alright, this totally didn't work. The way it's supposed to work is this. So, when people are asked this question, actually when Ivy League students are asked this question, their average guess for this, when they're given 5 seconds to guess, is 512. Who did this side? Who did the count? You guys, right? How many of you said more than 512? How many of you said less than 512? Okay. Yeah, so you know what? That was about 50-50. So you guys probably around. Good. Different. All right, you guys. The average guess is 2,250. How many of you guys, well, actually, I know you guys didn't do very well at that. Sorry. Now, why are these numbers different? You know that this is exactly the same equation. But people are coming to these different answers because of this first number here. In one case, the number is 1, small number, and the other is 8. And so people see an 8, a number 8 being multiplied by a bunch of numbers, that's got to be pretty big. Other people see a 1 being multiplied by a number of numbers and say, okay, it's pretty big, but they don't think of it as big. So what's happening is people are angry on the first number that they see. They're using that unit of information to make their guess. It's an uncertain answer. You cannot do this equation in 5 seconds. So you have an uncertainty where you're just trying to come to some answer. You don't know exactly what it's going to be. You're guessing. And so you rely on the information you have, and you over-rely on the initial information you have. In this case, you first saw 8. In this case, you first saw 1. The actual number, by the way, is 40,320. How many people said more than that? How many people said less than that? Okay. Fine. Okay, I'll give you another example of anger. So, when people buy real estate, there is a list price, and usually that price is higher than what is actually ended up paid for because the people who own a house are trying to get, at the beginning, as much money as possible for their house. So they put up a list price, and then it gets negotiated downwards, and the buyer and seller agree on a particular price, and the house is bought. So this was a study that was done with students and real estate experts. They gave people information about a house, and the list price of the house was $119,900. They gave them all the information that you get when you're looking at buying a house. You get the square footage, and you get the age of the house, and the number of rooms, and the floor plan, and the neighborhood it's in, and what it used to sell for, and what the comparable houses in that neighborhood also sell for. So you have a lot of information about this house. And so they asked, okay, students look at this information, real estate experts look at this information. I want you guys to determine what the actual value of that house is. It's listed for $119,000 and change, but how much is it actually worth? How much would you pay for it? So the students estimated, not surprisingly, lower than what the listed value is, because you expect that these people are going to be trying to sell it for more than it's worth. As did the real estate experts. But then look what happened when you increase the list price of the house without changing anything else about the house. So the house is exactly the same. It's got the same square footage, it's in the same neighborhood. The other house is sold for the exact same amount. All that's changed in this case is that the list price went up a bit. It went up $10,000. And now look, students increase, actually quite a bit, increase their estimates of how much the house is worth, even though it's exactly the same house as this one. And the real estate agents who saw this price instead of this price, even though they are real estate experts, are still increasing the amount that they think it's worth by $12,000, even though it's exactly the same house. What's happening there is they are in an uncertain situation. They are anchoring on the first bit of information they have. They have a bit of numeric information. They're trying to produce numeric information. They let that piece of numeric information affect their decisions more than they actually should. They're not taking into account all the other factors as much as they're taking into account that list price. And it goes on from there. So you increase it by 10,000, increase it by another 10,000. People keep increasing their estimates of what that house is worth. So now, if you're trying to sell a house, regardless of what it's worth, why would you say it's worth 100? Why would you list it for 119,000 when you can list it for 149,000 and people will think it's worth so much more? Simply because you changed the price that you're listing it for. You haven't changed anything else about the house, just the price it's being paid for. People anchor on the first bit of information that they get. So that's anchoring. That's the anchoring line. It's relying too heavily on an initial piece of information in decision making. Any questions on that one? Okay. So far we've covered availability heuristic, representativeness heuristic, and anchoring. Who can tell me what the availability heuristic is? Yes?
You go over you've seen the most to make a judgment about what's more likely?
Yes, very close. So the answer was you go on what you've seen the most, and as a result, you make a judgment about what's most likely. It's close, it's usually that, but the difference is that it's what comes most closely to mind, right? So what comes most easily to mind? What's the most thinkable? So for example, you've seen a lot of four-letter words that have an R in the third space. For example, word has an R in the third space. You've seen those a lot. They just are harder to remember as having the R in them, as with the words that start with R. So it's availability to mind rather than actual frequency. Some things you've seen a lot of times, but they don't come easily to mind. Representative heuristic. Who wants to try that one? Yes?
Using what you see, hear, know, in order to, you're overlying on something in order to follow a schema that you're aware of by ignoring the base rates?
Yes. So you are using how representative of a schema an example is. So you're using how representative of the idea that you have feminists, that they're 31-year-old outspoken single former activists. And you use the example of what you think, you use the example of a math-loving smart guy to describe what a physics professor said. Use the example, how well it fits the schema to determine whether that is that schema, ignoring the base rates. So for example, what would be like a really extreme example? All right, so there's a large man who, no, I can't do it. I can't come up with one on the spot. Okay. I'm thinking, okay, forget it. Sorry, the judgment, I'm getting all sorts of card advice myself. I can't work myself out of it. Who wants to tell me what anchoring? Who wants to tell me what anchoring is? It was just there. Yes?
You rely on the first piece of information.
Right. You over-rely on initial pieces of information when you're trying to determine something that's uncertain. See, here's another study that was done. Who's that? Gandhi, right? Okay. They asked one group, did Gandhi die before or after the age of 9? That's a stupid question. After. Okay, and then they asked the other group, did Gandhi die before or after the age of 140? Also kind of a stupid question. Obviously, he died before that. Nobody's lived to 140. And certainly, it wouldn't make sense that he died before 9, given everything he did. And so, these are these are questions that you actually shouldn't use in any judgment you make at all. But all they're doing is giving you an initial number, giving you an initial age. Here they're giving the age of 9, and here they're giving you the age of 140. And then what they did is they asked these two groups, how old do you think Gandhi was when he died? group said 67. So just the fact that this group had a small number mentioned in the question led them to anchor downwards. They said, okay, well, it wasn't at 9, obviously, so it was a little further up from 9. Actually, it was a lot further up from 9. I'll adjust all the way to 50. And the other group was like, okay, it certainly wasn't 140. Nobody lives that long. And then they moved down from that. And so they moved down, but they don't move down far enough. Does anybody know how old Gandhi actually was when he died? I don't either. Does anybody know? You were right. You have the phone? Okay. 78. Okay. 78. No? Yeah. All right. So, as I mentioned, anchoring exists when we have uncertain values that we're trying to derive. If we knew that Gandhi died when he was 78, then those kind of questions are not going to affect you. But when it's a number that you don't know, when it's really anything that you don't know, it's something that you're uncertain about, you're going to try to use these shortcuts. You're going to use these cognitive heuristics to make a guess. It's going to affect your guess. So, when people go to buy wine, you guys are all underage, but you've seen people buy wine on TV. Wine stores, they organize the wine like this. And what people do is they see a cheap bottle, and they see a medium bottle, and they see a more expensive bottle, and they say, well, I don't want cheap wine, but I'm not ridiculous, I'm not extravagant, I'm not going to buy expensive wine, so I'll buy the wine in the middle. So there you go, you buy the $14 wine. Some people just buy the cheap wine. But wine stores, and really all stores, know this about people. So wine is a particularly interesting case because it's hard to value how much a bottle of wine is worth, right? In fact, they do these experiments when even veteran wine drinkers, if you give them, blindfold them and give them one wine and say, how much do you think that wine is worth? And you give them another wine, how much is that worth? Their answers do not correlate with price at all. So people are just as likely to like a cheap price wine as an expensive price wine. It's very, very difficult to understand how much a wine should cost just from seeing it or tasting it. So people usually choose the middle one, and so what stores do is they'll do this. All right, we'll make this really expensive one, really expensive, so it's $85, right? So now, the middle one, it doesn't seem so bad that it's $25. Now, previously, you wouldn't pay $25 because that was expensive. They're the same wines, but now it's like, okay, well, that seems like a reasonable deal, right? It's the one in the middle. How bad could it be? They use very expensive products, and people anchor on those so that they will pay more for their products. When I was living in Vancouver, there was a really high-end supermarket, and they flew in from Paris one loaf of bread every day, and they charged $99 for this loaf of bread, and nobody would buy it. But just the fact that they had a $99 product made spending $7 for a loaf of bread not seem as ridiculous as it would had they not had that $99. So stores specifically use high anchors that nobody's going to buy just to elevate the price that you're willing to spend. So you're anchoring on that number. This actually relates to the door on the face technique that we talked about before, right? Where you're trying to get your dad to buy you a $500 iPad, and so you ask for a $2,500 laptop. Compared to the laptop, the iPad doesn't seem so bad. What's happened is your dad is anchored on $2,500 and seen the comparison. How much, he has an uncertain value to determine. How much is my daughter worth? How much, what does my daughter deserve? Okay, you guys know what I'm saying? So initially, he has the $2,500 number, and he says that's too much. $2,500 is very crazy, and then $500 is anchored downwards. Well, actually, that seems reasonable. If you initially asked your dad for a $600, $500 iPad, and then he said, yeah, and they said $2,500, that's not as much as a foot in the door. And so a foot in the door technique. So that would actually say, well, no, now that's ridiculous. That's way more than I Questions? I'm going to give you guys a couple more examples of anchoring to really hammer this point home. So, how many of you guys have read the magazine The Economist? Okay, a few of you guys. I like that magazine. It's well written. This is what they did for their pricing. So, you guys can, if you can't see this, they're offering a web subscription, so you have the online version of the magazine for $59, and then they're offering a print subscription for $125, and then they're offering a print subscription with the web subscription also for $125. So, you would have to be stupid to buy just the print subscription without the web subscription. You're getting the web subscription in addition for the same price. Now, the readers of The Economist are not stupid, but they do fall for these judgment decision-making errors, these cognitive errors, just as much as everyone else does. And The Economist, the marketing team behind The Economist is actually very smart, and they realize that. So when you're given this option, what happens? Not very many people buy the $59 web subscription. Nobody buys just the print subscription. Why would they? And 84% buy the print and web subscription. Why is that? Why do you have such a large number buying the print and web subscription? Yes?
Because you get the $59 for free.
Yeah, because you get the $59 for free. So basically what you're seeing here is, well, $125 for a print subscription, maybe that's how much it's worth. And here I get $125 for $125 I get the print subscription and the web subscription. That is such a good deal. That is such a good deal that I'm going to buy that one because it seems like such a better deal than that one for sure. And that one doesn't seem like a very good deal itself because I get all this for $125. So what happens if you take away this option? If you don't put that option and you just do what most retailers kind of would do and they've not been exploiting these tricks, you get this. Now it reverses. Many more people are going to buy the web subscription, and fewer people are going to buy the thing combined. Because now it doesn't seem like nearly as much of a big deal. Questions on that? All right, here's one that might be a little closer to home. AT&T used to have more of a monopoly on the iPhone and iPad market. I think for a while it was just AT&T and Verizon. And at that point, nobody really knew how much a data plan is actually worth. How much is a gig of 3G worth? Nobody had really heard of those, at least the 3G term before. So it was uncertain. It was uncertain how much it's worth. And so this is what AT&T did. They put 250 megabytes a month for $15 and an unlimited amount for $30. Now again, they're not dumb. They're doing this on purpose. They know that 250 megabytes is really too small for anybody really to want, right? I get like 250 megabytes worth of emails after every test from you guys, right? I just download it and my whole plan is used up. But if I have unlimited, well, that's a much, much better deal. And look at that. It's only twice as much as the little piddling one. And so, obviously, I'm going to choose this. Now, they could have priced this totally differently, but they priced it in a way where you would anchor off $15, and you think, well, you get that much for $15, so getting an unlimited amount is definitely worth twice that. It's definitely worth twice that. And so they use anchoring all the time. All the time. You guys are going to stores, you're buying something online, you're always being affected by anchoring. One of the most effective tricks that consumers use, that sellers use, and you guys have seen this one, is they will put a originally $17.99 now on sale for $12.99. They will raise the price to $17.99 just to cut it, so to give you a contrast. You don't know how to value a tie, right? You don't know how much a tie is worth, or in particular that tie with that pattern. And so you look at it, and it's, well, it's certainly a better deal than $17.99. It looks like I'm getting a deal because I'm anchoring off that initial amount. That trick is used all the time. It's extremely effective, even though everybody really knows how they're being manipulated. So watch out for this the next time you're buying a data plan or wine or whatever. Think about this, yeah. When you go home, you would think if they have a wine tasting and you try these two, and you knew that one was more expensive, you think it tastes better first of all. But if you took them together, and this one tasted a little bit better, and so you're like, I gotta buy this one, and then you take it home, the thing is when you get home, this one isn't in comparison to any other wine. So it's no longer the marginal benefit you get from that, getting that wine. It tastes fine, it's wine, right? And so the marginal utility of paying $14 more for something which tastes minusculely better when you're making the comparison, now all of a sudden when you're back home it doesn't make any sense. Questions on Anchor? Okay. The gambler's fallacy and the hot hand. These are very related concepts. We haven't had an excellent reference in a while. This one is especially good because it's a gambler and it's got a hot hand. So this is a brilliantly chosen graphic for this particular slide. All right. What's the gambler's fallacy? So if you flip a coin 4 times, and each time it comes up heads, what do people think is going to happen afterwards? Heads. People think, really? No, actually people think it's going to come up tails. The gambler's fallacy is that if you see a streak happening, people feel like they're due. They're due for something happening. So if you say, if you're always betting on tails, and there's 4 heads in a row, you're thinking, so long as you believe that the coin is fair, you're thinking, well, there have been 4 heads, definitely the next one is going to be tails. People make the gambler's fallacy by thinking that what happened to the coin before affects what's going to happen to the coin afterwards. Same for roulette, right? If you've been betting on black and the red has come up 3 or 4 times, you will feel that you're due. And so gamblers will stay there, keep thinking that they're due. They've lost money, and so they keep thinking that, well, this is going to get the money back from me because it's got to be black this time. It's been red for 112 times, it's got to be black now. People think that it's going to be tails, and it is just as likely to be heads. Why? Because each flip is independent of what happened before. The coin doesn't know what it did last time. It doesn't know that it's been heads, 4 heads in a row. It's just going to be 50-50, heads or tails either way. The gambler's fallacy in this case is totally wrong. It's a fallacy that leads people to lose a lot of money. Questions on that one? Okay, you guys got to ask some questions because I realize that this lecture is a little shorter than the ones before. The corollary of the gambler's fallacy is the hot hand fallacy. Now there was a video game back in the mid-90s called NBA Jam, and I think they made a remake of NBA Jam recently. So what happened in NBA Jam is if you sunk enough baskets, it was a basketball game, and it had really big heads. They had really big heads on normal-sized bodies. It was very cartoonish. It was actually very popular. But the point is that if you sunk a lot of baskets in a row, what would happen is it would say, he's on fire. And what would happen then is every time you shot the basket, shot the ball, it would be on fire, and you couldn't miss a shot. So if you got 3 or 4 baskets in a row, for a limited amount of time, you could not miss a shot. You had a hot hand. You were on fire. Now, basketball players and basketball coaches and basketball fans believe that that's actually the case. If somebody has been on a streak, they think that they're likely to carry on the streak, right? That there's something about them in that moment that actually makes them more likely to score a point, 2 points than they would otherwise. So Tom Gilovich, who was the researcher behind the Spotlight experiment, you guys remember the T-shirt with the Barry Manilow picture on it? That guy was the guy who looked at Gilovich, not Manilow, looked at all the data on this. He studied if people were more likely to sink a basket after being on a hot hand, having sunk many before, and he found that there's actually no truth to it. Again, every shot is relatively independent of every previous one. Having sunk 3 baskets does not make you any more likely to sink 4th than had you missed 3 baskets. So the hot hand, if you sunk some shots in a row, you're more likely to sink the next shot, except that you're not. Apparently, this is a rumor. So Pat Riley, who was a big fan, basketball coach, who was a big fan of the hot hand, was told about this research. This Yale professor was found, blah, 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 blah. And he said, Professor Gilovich should get back to his books. And he kept believing in the hot hand. But statistics say otherwise. Recently, very recently, I think actually this year, there was a reanalysis of all these data. They analyzed, I think, 85,000 shots using some technology that was borrowed from an Israeli missile defense technology to track all sorts of positions and whatever. So they broke basketball games down by 1/20th of a second, looked at every single thing that happened on the court, and they found that there is a very, very, very small hot hand effect. It's about 1.2%, which means that if you sunk 3 shots in a row, you're 1.2% more likely to sink the next shot. So you're so from a 3-point range, you're 41% rather than 40% likely to sink that shot if you sunk 3 baskets. Basically, it's a negligible amount. Questions on Gambler's fallacy or the hot hand? All right. The reason for both of these is that we tend to see patterns all the time. So we tend to see patterns in randomity. We crave patterns. Actually, if you make people feel uncomfortable, if you make people feel anxious, they see more patterns. They're craving order in the world. So we tend to see patterns in order random events all the time. And once we suspect that a pattern exists, the confirmation bias takes over. So you'll remember those times that somebody who scored 3 baskets in a row scored the 4th. You'll remember that that's support. That's evidence for the existence of the hot hand. But you will forget those times when that person missed it, when they scored 3 baskets and then missed it. Similarly, you will remember, gamblers will remember when they thought they were due, and indeed they were due, and they won a big amount of money, then the opposite. Okay, loss aversion. This was one of the very, very first of these questions.
I was just wondering, what's the difference?
The difference between the gambler's fallacy and the hot hand. So the gambler's fallacy is a negative thing where you're hoping for the positive, where you're expecting the positive. So things have been in a streak, and you expect now the opposite to happen because it's due. For the hot hand, the hot hand is actually specific to sports, because in that case, the 4th shot is not actually fully independent from the first 3 because it's the same person shooting them. So the only thing they have in common is that they're streaks. They're based on streaks. You see a pattern in the streak. For the hot hand, in the case of sports, you expect that somebody who's done something good multiple times will do something good again. And the gambler's fallacy, if something has happened one way multiple times, it's due, something random, something chance, is due to happen the opposite afterwards.
We have a question.
Yes?
Why don't gamblers quit when they're on heaters then?
Quit when they're...
When they're on a heater, like when you're winning a lot, shouldn't you that you're due for a lawsuit before you also make money?
Yeah, you should. You should. If people all quit while they were ahead, you've got a problem. They don't. Why don't they? Well, for one thing, the experience of winning is very rewarding, and so you keep wanting to pursue it. And it's possible that you do see, like, a hot hand thing happen there. There's a positivity bias on that, right? So you think that when something good is happening, it's due to your own skill rather than due to random chance. And as a result, you're more confident in your abilities to keep winning. Which is, it makes sense for things like poker, say, where there actually is skill involved. But if you're playing roulette, it doesn't make any sense. Other questions? Yes?
How do you take into account the probability? Because the probability of flipping 3 heads in a row is much smaller than the probability
Well, so the probability of flipping 8 heads in a row is the same as the probability of any other pattern that alternated between, right? So 3 heads and then a tail and then two more tails and then a head. and a tail. That's just as likely as whatever heads in a row. And if you have 8 heads in a row, you're just as likely to get another head afterwards and a tail. The point is that something will have to happen. Some pattern will have to happen before that point, and at that point, it's independent of what happens after that, right? So whatever happened before, if it was likely, it was unlikely, or actually any pattern that happened was just as likely to happen as any other pattern. We have this Amber's fallacy when we interpret that there was a streak, a pattern, when it was actually always just random chance. So getting 8 in a row is always going to be as random as getting any other pattern. But when we see 8 in a row, we tend to think, well, there's a pattern there, and therefore the tails must be due. Other questions? Okay, so loss aversion was one of the very first of these cognitive fallacies to be found. Basically, the idea behind loss aversion is this. If I were to flip a coin for you, if I were to say to you, I'll flip the coin, and if it lands heads, you'll get $30, and if it lands tails, you won't get anything. That seems like a good bet for you guys, right? If you get, you have a 50% chance of winning the $30 if you get the heads, and you have a 50% chance of losing, not winning anything if you get tails. So your expected value would be about $15, right? 50% chance of 30, 50% chance of 0, expected value would be $15. Now, if you did it this way, where if you got heads, I'd give you $150, and if you got tails, I would take $100 from you. Now, in this case, you have a 50% chance of getting $150, and a 50% chance of losing $100. So your expected return, taking into account those two different odds, would be $50. So if you did this one, you're actually more likely to be ahead more money than if you did this one. But the problem, the difference is, in this one you can actually lose something, or in this one, you're not likely to lose anything. And so even though your gains, your potential gains will be higher in this case, because there's a possibility that you're going to lose money, you don't want to do it. And this is what's called loss aversion. The losses are psychologically more powerful than gains. The worry that you're going to lose something is going to be much more aversive to you than the potential of gaining something. And that's why, even though there's an imbalance here, even though this is statistically a good bet, the possibility that you're going to lose something turns you off there. Now, one of the consequences of loss aversion is this thing that's called the endowment effect. Now, the endowment effect is simply the idea that owning something, even for just a short time, even for just a marginal amount, makes it more valuable. And it makes it more valuable because now to part with that thing would mean losing something, rather than actually not having something at all. One of the interesting experiments was done by this behavioral economist at Duke called Dan Ariely. And Duke, as you guys know, is a massive basketball school. And during the playoffs, the tickets become so hard to get for students that they will camp out to be the ones who have the opportunity to buy the tickets. So this year, when Ariely was running it, there weren't enough tickets for the campers. And as a result, they decided that there was going to be a lottery. All the people who camped out would be put into a hat, and they would pick out as many people as they had tickets for and give them the opportunity to buy it. And so it was random who got to buy the tickets and who didn't. So all of a sudden, right here, we have a natural experiment developed. You know, random assigned into two groups. They were both the same. They both wanted these tickets. They both camped out for them. Some got the opportunity to buy it, and some didn't. Now, the question was, that's relevant to the endowment effect, is how much will the owners be willing to part with their tickets for? How much will they sell them? How valuable are they to the owners? And how much are the people who don't own them willing to pay for them? So what the difference between these two is how willing you are to part with something you already have versus how willing you are to pay for something that you don't yet have. Now, the tickets should be valued the same because these are two groups that both wanted them, they were randomly assigned, there was no systematic differences between them, they both wanted the tickets initially same degree. The only difference is some got them and some didn't. And so what happened? So if we look at the price that the sellers are willing to part and what the owners are willing to pay for. So first looking at the buyers, the people who don't have them, they were willing to fork out $100 to buy these tickets. The sellers said that they would part with the ticket for $2,000. It was a massive, massive difference. Now, why is that? Well, so what the sellers are thinking is they are about to have this great experience, right? They have registered in their head that they're going to have this great experience. They have the ticket. They're going to go to this game. This is going to be the capstone of my entire undergraduate experience. That's what I would be giving up. I have that. It's going to happen. That's what I'm going to be giving up. And that's worth a lot to me. So I would need $2,000 to do that. On the other hand, the non-owners, people who didn't get the tickets, are expecting, well, what's going to happen? I'm probably going to go to a bar with my friends who also didn't get tickets. We'll watch the game. It'll be fun. It would be nice to have that other ticket. I would pay $100 for that. I would pay $100 for having something more that I don't currently have. But the people who are endowed with the tickets, they have taken ownership of what the ticket means, and they would now be losing it. There's an aversion to actually losing something you already have that doesn't exist for something that you're trying to get. They've done a few experiments on this. So one is they had students at Harvard, they had two paintings. And one group said, choose one of the paintings, you're going to get to keep that painting, but there's no exchanges, no give backs. Keep that painting. The other was saying, choose one of the paintings, but over the next week, if you want to give it back and switch it for the other one, you can. And what happened was that the group who said who had to keep the painting, they liked it a lot more. They were endowed with it a lot more. They would be much less willing to part with it than with the group who didn't really take ownership of it because they always had the opportunity to trade it. So there is a very large endowment effect for things that we already have. We're not willing to trade. My girlfriend has this really crappy car. It's really bad, and she was trying to figure out, it's like worth, probably less than $2,000, and she's trying to figure out, well, should I keep this car, should I sell it, and do something else with the money? And she's very, very much driven by the endowment effect. I have this car, it's mine, I don't want to sell it, even though it's a piece of crap, it's not really worth very much. Questions on this? So, loss aversion is a very powerful thing. If you ask people, if you give people vignettes where you frame it in different ways, in one situation there's a 60% chance of gaining something. So say you can, there's 200 people and you have a 60% chance of saving 200 people and 40% chance of everybody dying. People will not like that at all. But if you say, how does it go? That you have a 100% chance of saving 400 people. Sorry, other way around. If you have a 100% chance of saving 400 people and 100% chance of 200 people dying, compared to if you have a 60% chance of saving 400 people and a 40% chance of saving 200, the fact that there will be mass death in the other, even though the vignettes are statistically the same, you will want to avoid the mass death because it's an aversion to lots of people dying, even though you're likely to save just as many people regardless of the vignette you take. Okay, so at the beginning of the course, I told you that the things that you can actually get from psychology is that it can help you understand other people. It can help you understand why they do things. We talked about that in social psychology a lot. We talked about that in developmental psychology, how to understand children, etc. It can help us understand ourselves. We talked about that in our consciousness lecture. We talked about all the things that happen behind unavailable consciousness that are affecting your behavior and you don't know about. And then I promise you that maybe it will teach you how to live your lives better. These are things which will actually allow you to live your lives better. You are making these errors all the time. If you think back, you will be able to come up with certain instances in which you made that error. Some instance where you weren't willing to part with something, even though it was a much better deal to do so. Instances where you made the availability heuristic, you misunderstood something because something came to mind more easily. And then there's many, many more times that you can't remember. We've all made these errors all the time. As you go forward, I want you guys to remember these 7 things. I'm going to go over them in a second. I want you to remember these 7 things, and I want you to look out in your lives when they happen, and try to inoculate yourself from making those errors again. You will see the benefit of doing this once you start noticing how frequently these things happen in your life. Okay, brief review. Availability heuristic. What is it?
Not when you see something most frequently, and it becomes most readily to your mind.
That's right. Not when you see something necessarily more frequently, but when something comes readily to mind, you think it's more frequent. Representativeness heuristic. Go for it. Yes?
Using what's representative of something in order to rely on a schema by ignoring the base rates.
Yeah. You think about how an example of something is represented in the schema that you know, and you use that information rather than thinking about base rates or other likelihood information. What was after that? Anchoring. Oh yeah, that was really cool. Anchoring. What's anchoring? Yes?
Relying too heavily on the initial information, but it is an uncertain outcome.
That's right. So you see, you're given one figure which helps you value something. It helps you determine how old was Gandhi when he died. Well, let's start at 140, or let's start at 9. And those numbers, they anchor you, they pull you in those directions. You use them to make an estimate for something that you are uncertain about. There's another really classic experiment about that. Yeah, so they did this thing where this one's actually in your textbook. They had a roulette wheel, which was likely to stop at 10 or likely to stop at 49. And then they asked people how many countries are in the United Nations. Something completely unrelated to the roulette wheel. And people who saw the number land on 10 estimated there were half as many countries as members in the UN than the people who saw it land at 49. Completely unrelated information. Your mind anchors on those numbers when you're trying to think about something that you don't already know. Gambler's fallacy.
They see a pattern and they think something to do.
Yeah. So you see 4 heads in a row, you think that a tail is due. Hot hand. Okay. Yes.
Same pattern and assuming it's been continued in the same positive manner.
Yeah. Specifically to skills. So you see somebody do something really well in what you perceive to be a streak, and you think the streak will continue because there's something about the prior performance which can affect their next performance. Loss aversion. Just the idea that losses are psychologically more powerful than gains. That you're going to try to avoid losing something to a greater degree than you're going to try to get something. You're going to be much more upset about losing $100 than you are about winning $100. And you guys know that. If you've ever lost like $20 in your pocket versus if you found $20 in your pocket, find $20, you're elated for like an hour. If you lose $20, you're kind of, kicking yourself for the whole day. And finally, the endowment effect. Yes?
Really owning something makes it value.
Yeah, owning something makes value. That $20 that you had in your pocket was worth more to you because you already had it than the $20 that you found on the ground. Okay, we're going to talk about positive psychology next class. Before that, make sure you go on the DF Character Strengths website, do your character strengths test, it'll take about 20 minutes, and then answer your answers on the culture survey, and we'll go over the next class.